Good afternoon. I'm Chief Master Sergeant Randy Anderson, U.S. Air Force retired former Air Commando, and the host for today's SOF Stories Live, Topic 2, Task Force Ranger in Mogadishu. Thank you for joining us. Throughout this series, we will explore former campaigns and operations, focusing solely on the historical context of special operations involvement from a personalized perspective. Each month, over the next several months, SOF Stories Live will invite guest panels composed of former special operators represented from every service branch of the United States Special Operations Command. All panel members are former special operators who served at the operationally deployed level. We will selectively choose officers and enlisted members for a particular topic based on their actual personal involvement in various operations, not from the campaign point of view, but as the special operators at the tactical level. This venue will give them a unique opportunity to share with you, the audience, their insights and unbiased experiences from their personal point of view. Some of it widely documented in publications, in film, some of it not. These stories are told from the perspective of the person who witnessed the event. We recognize our guest panel experienced significant stress under combat conditions in the fog of war. Their insight is exclusive only to their respective mission and role, and not necessarily those of others. It is important to note two people can often view the same event and have two unique recollections. With this in mind, these experiences are often decades removed from the battlefield, so any historical inconsistencies are unintentional and not necessarily have been previewed prior to release with the Department of Defense, nor does it represent their views. Therefore, it is our intent to present the stories as they are remembered by the special operator who experienced them. October marks the anniversary of the events surrounding the Battle of Mogadishu, 1993, in Somalia, and the circumstances surrounding the Special Operations response, representing U.S. Army Special Operations units assigned to Task Force Ranger. A brief note to the audience: to prevent interruption, your microphones will be muted during the entire broadcast. If they're not, please do mute them. However, you will be given the opportunity to submit questions for the panel at the end of the presentation via the chat function. It is an honor and privilege to introduce the moderator for today's podcast, Command Sergeant Major Rick Clam, U.S. Army retired. Rick is also a former U.S. Army Special Operator, serving his career as both the Ranger and Special Forces Green Beret. Rick was also assigned to Task Force Ranger. Rick, would you please introduce today's guest panel?
Absolutely, Randy. Hey, thanks for that introduction. Today's SOF Stories Live is honored to welcome a distinguished panel of gunslingers, no kidding gunslingers, consisting of U.S. Army Special Operators. We have with us today Major Mike Moser, U.S. Army retired, Sergeant Major Bart Wiggins, U.S. Army retired, and Master Sergeant Mark Stevens, U.S. Army retired. Gentlemen, welcome to SOF Stories Live, and thank you for sharing your stories today. Before we get started, let me provide a little bit of context for anybody in the audience who's not familiar with Operation GOTHIC, SERPENT, and Task Force Ranger in Somalia. Now, Somalia was a basket case. Following independence in 1960, at the height of the Cold War, Somalia suffered several border disputes with Soviet-backed Ethiopia. Then they fought this destructive civil war, which literally trashed the country and then robbed them of their security. They also endured a deadly famine. By 1990, Somalia had become a failed state, with no legitimate central government and no means of conducting trade. Warring clans and heavily armed vehicles called technicals roamed the streets and vied for power. They used threat, intimidation, and murder to get what they wanted. Everyone was high on this narcotic called khat, which gave them a break from the hunger and the hardship, but it also made them volatile, irritable, and unpredictable. The clans began using international food relief as a weapon to fund their operations and starve their opposition. The United Nations deployed troops under 2 United Nations Security Council resolutions designed to establish peace and security and distribute the food aid. So in 1993, Mohammed FARAH AIDEED and his Habbergetter clan attacked Pakistani peacekeepers and raided a food supply point. They inflicted over 80 casualties. With the UN mission in danger of unraveling, the United States deployed Task Force Ranger in August of 1993 to kill or capture AIDEED, dismantle his network, and get the food aid flowing. Major Moser, Mike, please briefly tell us your rank, position, and assignment once you learned you were going to Mogadishu, Somalia.
So thanks, Rick. This is Mike. I was part of the assault force. I had just been assigned to that particular unit and was there about 6 months and was drawn into the initial train up as part of that whole thing. I came out of 7th Group where actually Rick Lamb and I worked together down in Panama for a while.
I do remember that.
But the train up and the deployment for this thing were, the big event for my initial time there, and I was pretty excited to be part of it. I was, again, part of the assault force, but I was assigned the duties of breacher as an individual team. We developed 2 templates to execute operations on the ground there in Mogadishu. One was designed as a strong point assault for in the event that we had intelligence that there was an individual in the building that we needed to go in there and extract. The other template was a more desirable one, in my opinion, was to intercept a convoy during its movement. If we had intelligence that was actionable, that a particular person on our hit roster was in vehicular movement, we could deploy the whole force in its airborne configuration and assault the convoy and intercept him at on ground that was more favorable to us rather than trying to hit a place that might have already had defenses prepared. So those were the 2 templates, and I carried 2 different weapon systems based on which template I was going to execute. I had a SAW, a squad automatic weapon ready to go as part of the vehicle intercept thing, because my chief function was to stop that vehicle so that the others could assault it. And then for the strong point assaults, I would typically carry a CAR-15. But also as team breacher, I was loaded out with a number of demolition charges to execute breaching operations to gain entry to places. So those were the 2 options that we had. And that's kind of where I fell into it.
Beautiful. Hey, thanks, Mike. Sergeant Major Wiggins, Bart, briefly tell us your rank, position, and assignment once you learned you were going to Mogadishu.
Okay, thanks. Glad to be here. I was a Sergeant First Class. I have a similar background to Mike. I also came out of 7th Group. Oh, there's my picture. Yep, that's me. I also came out of 7th Group. I had been in the unit probably a year and a half when that happened. We were actually back at Fort Bragg preparing to go forward. So I was also a team breacher, very similar to Mike. And while he was forward, we were using the same kit and practicing a lot of the same operations that he was actually forward doing.
True, and that's worthy of note too, because I know that for the listeners out there that we didn't know how long this thing was going to last. So they did have 2 units in training simultaneously to relieve the other one in case it got protracted. But thank you, Bart. Master Sergeant Stevens, Marcus Aurelius. Hey, briefly tell us your rank, position, and assignment once you learned you were going to Mogadishu.
How's it going? I appreciate you having me on. I'm honored to be able to kind of chat about this stuff. So at the time, I was a Sergeant First Class, and again, similar background to Bart and Mike. Came out of 7th. And I had actually I was in a unique position that I went through rehearsals with all 3 sub-components within the unit. And then when they went, I ended up going with the element that went initially in August. And so initially what they had, what I was doing was kind of acting as a liaison officer depending on what would come up. So I would be plugged into that capacity, whether it be work with U.S. forces, the Quick Reactionary Force, UN forces, or whatever, and then be in a position to supplement or backfill as needed.
Beautiful. Hey, thanks, Marcus. And as you guys remember, for my part, I was Sergeant First Class as well. I was assigned to 3rd Ranger Battalion at the time. And I deployed to Somalia as a battalion operations sergeant with a small slice of command, control, communications, and support guys, clerks, admin personnel. My mission was to embed with the task force staff and then enable Bravo Company 3rd Ranger Battalion to close with and destroy the enemy, provide the cordon, if you will, and seize and hold key terrain. Now let's get started. With the meat of it, I guess, that we're all waiting for. I'd like the audience to know what each of you guys were doing, kind of expound on what you were doing and what your primary role was. Mark, let's start with you.
Sure. So as I kind of stated before, there was really no change from the rehearsals to deployment when we got there. Again, my main capacity was the role of a liaison officer, and be used during operations when either we were dealing with other U.S. forces. At that particular time, it was the 10th Mountain, who I think had just replaced the 101st, and they were in the capacity of the Quick Reactionary Force of QRF. And then, of course, we had a large presence of UN, and so there was always some form of interaction with them, and then other elements that could potentially pop up and arise, and just to make sure that we had that liaison between elements when we were conducting operations, during and post operations, and then again just remain fluid. And this happened to me several times, to where I would be called out for follow-on needs and or to backfill. So that was kind of my role in the beginning.
Hey, thanks, Mark. How about you, Mike? You want to expound? I know you covered a little bit of this in your intro, but what were you doing, and what was your role?
So I was part of a 5-man assault force, and in the package that we developed, we were loaded on several aircraft. That whole aviation package consisted of a stream of BLACKHAWKS with a short section of Little Birds sandwiched in between the nose of it. The Little Bird package was where I found myself. I was on board Star 4-1, and our flexibility with regard to being able to deploy from the Little Birds, we formed the core assault package to go into the strong point or to assault the vehicle, depending on which option we use, like I was saying. I said I was a member of a 5-man assault force. One of our guys had to get sliced away because of the payload of the Little Bird was only 4 assaulters. He got sliced away to the Black Hawk ahead of us as part of that initial cordon type force that assisted us with the assault. The deployment to Somalia, again, we were looking at 2 different options, but there was consideration of an option where we didn't have to actually occupy ground inside the city of Mogadishu from which to launch operations. And I kind of, that's the one that appealed to me. I think there was this discussion of being on board an aircraft carrier and launching from that platform, and that would have afforded us a little more secrecy with regard to what the Somalis were able to collect on us. But we ended up occupying that hangar there in the town of, right on the airstrip there, and that was a little more vulnerable in my opinion. But those were the chief functions. Again, like I said, I had 2 weapon systems that I could draw on depending on what they were ginning up in the TOC for us to action. The duplicate kit essentially, and I just hanging out doing my thing.
Hey, thanks, Mike. And again, it's an incredible story. I mean, it's a harbinger for what the next probably 30 years was gonna hold for the forces, and because all this stuff was in its infancy at the time, and but it was very flexible with the ability to, like you said, swap guys onto different aircraft and just kind of go with it. We're going to interdict it by ground, by coming from the ground, coming from the water. Great time to be alive. How about you, Bart?
Sure thing. Yeah, I was in the same unit as Mike and Mark, but in a sister element. We were back at Fort Bragg training up to rotate in, and we're a few weeks out from doing so. I don't remember the exact date of when we were supposed to rotate in, but we had it was a few weeks out, and we had already been training for several weeks. And then things, of course, got sped up a little bit on 3 October when the Battle of Mogadishu occurred, and we were alerted that we were going to be heading over. We had been training to do relief in place at the time, and we would receive AARs from forward, and then we'd task organize to replicate what Mike and Mark were doing forward, so that when we got overseas, we were prepared to hit the ground running. All of our feedback we received from them was excellent. We were tweaking our SOPs and our tactics, techniques, and procedures from all the lessons learned that were shared almost daily to ensure we were familiar with the enemy and, like I said, able to be affected and able to integrate immediately once we got on the ground. So that was some of the best training I'd ever done. I'd only been there like a year and a half, as I said before. We had all of our kit dialed in based on feedback that we got from them, and really were well prepared based on the information they had given us, and so that's basically it.
Outstanding. Thanks, Bart. I actually remember writing some of those sit reps. In fact, I think I suffered a paper cut that kind of still haunts me even today. And for my part, I was I was an operations sergeant. So I worked in the Joint Operations Center of the JOC. And did you guys remember the large, it's like an 18 by 6 foot satellite image of Mogadishu, the city? And it was mounted on one wall in the JOC there. And when I first rolled in, I thought, man, this is state of the art. And so when an intelligence tip would come in and on a different target location, I'd run over there with my dry erase marker and I'd mark the location on the wall. And then the Rangers would come in and they'd study the map. Remember, the airfield was down the south. And they'd figure out, okay, what's our routes going to be? Because generally we infilled by air, we reinforced by ground, and then we would exfil either by air or by ground. So as the Rangers are studying the big map and looking at how they're going to get their where their blocking positions and things are going to be, the pilots would come over. They'd look for nearby helicopter landing zones that they were actually either going to land on or fast rope into. They'd identify any obstacles. And they'd begin planning their infill and exfil routes. And then they'd look at the air pattern once they had dropped their loads and where they would actually loiter and then provide overwatch and fires. And then while that was going on, I'd open up this big, you remember that was like a 3 foot by 3 foot big old booklet of satellite imagery. It was enlarged. And you'd find the larger image of the objective area, and I'd throw that down on a table. And then the assault force commanders would come in, and they'd start planning on how they're going to take down the target. And the thing that fascinated me was a lot of it was, like you said, Bart, it was the SOPs. So you'd have a target, they would look at a likely breach point, and then if they couldn't get breached, they would just crawl over this thing like ants until they actually got into it. So again, the Rangers are securing the exterior, the assault forces going in on the target. And so all this organized chaos as they're talking through this, the task force commander's standing there and he's watching it. And then he'd provide guidance where he needed to, and then he'd approve the plan. By the time they were done talking, he would slap the table. And then once it was approved, I'd start sketching the scheme of maneuver on the dry erase board that had the print capability. you remember those? I thought that was state of the art. But we'd make multiple copies because it had copy capability. And then the leadership would go out to each of their sub-elements, and they'd run out and they'd brief the plan to the forces who were already loaded on the vehicles and already loaded on the aircraft, sometimes the rotor blades turning, and then they would take off and go do their thing. And again, that was state of the art in the analog age. But looking back on it from 30 years on, it's that was F3 EAD, the find, fix, finish, exploit, analyze, and disseminate. Beforehand, we didn't realize it at the time, though. We didn't realize that till later. Yep. So guys, I want to talk about when did you guys actually get there? Mike, let's start with you.
Yeah, I think the end of August, 28 August, was that when we arrived? I was part of the main body. And
I think it was around that time, yeah.
Yeah, so we got in, set up shop, realized that the hangar was a little bit vulnerable. I can't remember the dimensions on the place, but you just think of this big tractor shed or tin building where we housed everybody. So there was a fair amount of time spent, I think, sandbagging and trying to protect ourselves because we got mortared the first night. I want to say.
Welcome.
And that kind of set the tone. Like it's not a World War II style steady barrage. Bastogne sort of thing, but there was enough to be like, wow, we could actually get tagged here pretty easy because the journey from the cot out to the porta-john was a long and dangerous one in the middle of the night.
Thanks, Mike. Very true. How about you, Bart?
We left on the we found out everything on a third, of course, and we're being fed information kind of on the fly. Got all of our stuff loaded up and prepared to move out pretty quickly. because we figured we were going to be moved out, and sure enough, we were. We left on the 4th, and due to the time difference, them being a few hours ahead of us, we actually got in there on the 5th. The guys received us, even though, you know, they'd been through what they'd been through. They received us, had our area set up, got us moved right in. We actually arrived and got there just in time for the memorial for the guys that had been lost. So that was a very somber moment for all of us and for me, and, you know, something that I'll never forget. And of course, it was the next day on the 6th of October with you know, we had been wandering around talking to guys, you know, trying to get information from them and stuff. And that's when the mortar round, you know, the mortar round came in that hit and took out a portion of the staff and, of course, Matt. But yeah, that's a busy time getting in and catching up with the guys. That's kind of the things that stick out to me.
You know, and I remember that mortar round, because when you guys came in, I think you brought a lot of the higher level leadership that who were coming over, I think, from the memorial, but also just to see how things were going. And I was in the hospital by that time, and the casualties from that mortar round started coming in. And one of them was Gary Harrell. I remember talking to him. He was as he was going into surgery. And then the Ranger Regimental Sergeant Major Jesse Lay, he came in, and he had been wounded. And they had cut all of Jesse's clothes off when they medevaced him, because he was close to Matt, and he was covered with Matt. And so they removed some of the shrapnel from his neck, and he's standing there butt-ass naked. They did it under no anesthesia. And then he looked at me and said, "Lamb, give me your uniform." And so I quickly disrobed and gave him my uniform. And he put the uniform back on, and he went back to the hangar. But yeah, I do remember that. That's a harbinger of what Mike was talking about.
Yeah.
Marcus, how about you?
So got there with the main body. I believe it was the 28th. And, you know, it was funny. You got on the ground. You know, we in our head, we had imagined how this was going to go, and, you know, we were told that, you know, we were in control of our own destiny. We knew specifically what the mission was. And I swear, the moment we got on the ground, you knew the gig was up. You know, it was like we had arrived, and it was clear that, you know, we tried to get there in secrecy, and it was clear that the secrecy of everything was compromised right off the bat. And it had been done by political staffers and aides. You know, what good is a secret if I can't tell somebody about it, kind of thing. To feel important. So basically, when we got on the ground, everybody and their brother across the world knew who we were and what we were there to do. And so, you know, to Mike's point about, you know, operating, remotely off a different platform would have been way more optimal. But, you know, here we we're in this hangar, you know, and kind of in the low ground, if you will.
Yes, yeah.
Received that mortar fire, and sure enough, that night, as we were, you know, we got on the ground, immediately you're building up and staging, and, you know, you're setting up communications, the jocks getting set up, you know, the med shed, they're doing their, you know, all that logistical stuff, the prep stuff, you're doing your job, you're getting your kit ready, and you know, we had to stage the aircraft because of space. And it was a function of where do you put them all, make sure that they're protected. And we, you know, and one of the considerations was, you know, the visual on the aircraft, but not, you know, really thinking about the threat from the mortar fire. So then, you know, that night when it came in, you're trying to run from Sealand trailer to Sealand trailer, and then, you know, protect these birds. And initially it was to get them off that part of the airfield and get them somewhere where they were protected. And that was an interesting moment, because it was all hands on deck to do that. And, you know, breaking the little birds down and trying to get them out of harm's way, if you will. And so that was the welcome. Welcome to the world.
Yeah, and I remember that scramble, because everybody's thinking, is there more incoming? You know, and also I remember that whole mission for some reason. Do you remember when the Marines first went in and they came ashore during the early days of Unisom 2? I mean, I saw it on TV, or Unisom 1 rather, and they were, you know, the press were there giving interviews to the kids as they're in their Amtrak, trying to get them to move out of the way so they wouldn't crunch them.
Yeah.
Now, for my part, I think I arrived at the main body on or about 28 August. I linked up with my jock counterparts, whom I had never met before. I mean, this is my first time actually being there with the package. So we got after setting up the jock. Now, we did try to secure the perimeter with concertina wire. I remember that was like the first thing we did, and because we were very vulnerable, from that wall there. So then we began posting stationary and rotating guard forces, from the Rangers. And then we just kind of settled into that large airplane hangar. And then we tried to get the battle rhythm up and going. And I remember that. We dispatched a mounted security patrol that first afternoon. They were in an unarmored Humvee. They just wanted to check the area outside the perimeter, familiarize themselves with all the designated routes. And then that day, from the beginning, they received small arms fire, almost immediately. And then, of course, that mortar round that night. And again, like you say, that was our welcome to Somalia. So let's talk about your thoughts on arrival. Like most deployments to a forward staging base, I thought the arrival was kind of surreal. The surroundings were Spartan. The leadership was really nervous about the security. And then I don't know. I think we were talking about this earlier, Bart. You remember the square holes that they actually cut into the perimeter fence around the airfield, and they were like shop windows. And the locals would come up and they'd sell wood carvings and trinkets through these holes in the perimeter fence. Yep. And so after the first night with the mortars and stuff, we began erecting the bunkers. I think we got a bunch of derelict shipping containers, so we couldn't get a straight RPG shot into that hangar. Placing sandbags, remember, at the key locations. Redoubled the guard efforts, dispersed the aircraft, hardened the vehicles. We started to kind of get the feeling that, hey, this isn't going to be as easy as we thought. And so do you remember that, Mark? What were you thinking?
Yeah, it was, I go back to, jokingly, I remember, when I saw the press and all that stuff, I was like, wow, why did I cut my hair? The gig's up. They know we're here. And, we had focused on the security, right off the bat. To your point, we were improving our position all the time. And the other thing that I thought was very unusual is we were put in a position where we were not necessarily in control of all the people around us, the UN, that had access to in and around our area, whether it be a logistic need or just, you're co-located with all these other people, and we're trying to, keep close hold what we're doing from the standpoint of how we do it, but yet we've got eyes and ears all over us. And hell, Mohammed AIDEED had a UN ID card, so it wasn't like the UN were necessarily our friends. There was a lot of people within there that were eyes and ears for them reporting back. And in fact, I remember one of our guys, busting a couple of those guys, in and around our area, pulling surveillance, trying to, his impression was they were trying to calculate distances from certain known points to then, reverse those formulas for mortar rounds.
Oh, that's just like the movie Green Beret, where the guy walks up and smacks a dude. Hello, Charlie. Hey, man, I got to apologize for the haircut. I think that was actually my fault. I was talking to Gary Harold. Gary, he had the big guns, right? And he always had his sons out, guns out. And so we were coming out of the bus, I think, at Bragg, and I said, hey, sir, if you're going to pull off this cover story, right, of Task Force Ranger, you guys got to look like Rangers. And, your sleeves are down when you're wearing a patrol cap, and all you guys are like beards and mustaches, and the Rangers are high and tight. So this isn't gonna convince anybody. So, but I was half joking, right? And so the next thing I know, we're breaking down the Ranger pallets to get out barber kits. And I don't know if you remember, they were like a little Foot Locker. And we carried it. Back in that day, the Rangers actually deployed with barber kits so they could do their once-a-week haircut. And then we were giving you guys haircuts in the latrine with trash bags around your shoulders. And I don't even think you guys got a chance to shower before they put you on the airplane and sent you out. But to this day, I still get grief for that, man. So I apologize.
Team room, and literally everybody in my team looked at me and went, "Who are you?"
How about you, Iron Mike? What were you thinking?
Well, yeah, I was thinking, with this new haircut, I'm going to be fast as shit on the ground.
And handsome.
More aerodynamic than that. And I really wish we had, cell phones back in the day or whatever, something to capture all that, because it was a low point for us, but for you guys, I know it was a big deal. Hey, we're going to get to shear these sheep and send them on their way. As you throwing up my photo there? Yeah.
Dang, look at that.
That's me in disguise there.
Ranger.
Yeah. No, but yeah. So as far as arriving into country and all, I was pretty amazed that we even went. That there was political will to actually execute this thing. We had built a tremendous mousetrap. You know, I mean, and the mechanics of pinpointing an individual, or once he's pinpointed, executing that snatch and grab were awesome, and it was awesome training, is, you know, cutting edge stuff. But the weak link, of course, is the intelligence piece, is finding out where this guy is at, and then, just as you said, because our hand was tipped between CNN and everybody else, now the guy's even going to go further underground. I remember not being real positive about how it was going to work out. Like, we're actually, you know, here we are, and then it kind of degraded for a while into the Groundhog Day thing, like you were talking about. But you know, I was a little skeptical that it was actually going to happen because of that intelligence piece. The mortars. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, the mortars were one concern, you know, that was immediately apparent. Mark had talked about eyes being all over the place. I recall, you know, we have these porta potties, and, well, we're not going to empty them ourselves, so you hire the porta potty dude to bring his massive truck right into your perimeter, which we're like, wow, you could put a lot of explosives on one of those, and for whatever reason, it never happened. But there were a couple things that were concerning in my mind. So, yeah, I mean, other than that, we're just kind of waiting and hoping for that actionable intelligence, which eventually came.
Yeah, you know, and that's true. I mean, you're right. You know, part of it too with the enemy seemed like they were learning how to fight us.
Well,
you know, much like the Vietnamese did in the Adrang. I mean, because I can remember, and these conversations were happening around the you know, the trash pit or whatever. We began to see them like assemble faster. They were maneuvering better. I mean, they were tweaking their command and control. They were blocking the approaches because they knew we, you know, infill by air, reinforced by ground. They were placing vehicles and burning tires, you know, for smoke and confusion. And you're right. And the intel thing, I mean, we were always just, it seemed like one step behind. He was a wascally wabbit, because he would never stay in a spot more than just a few hours, and he was moving. How about you, Bart? What were you thinking?
Well, we were part of the follow-on, so we did everything that you guys had done in preparation for going, and that included getting haircuts. You guys got haircuts, so by God, we got haircuts. Then we get on the ground, and you guys hadn't had a haircut in 7 weeks, or where your hair was all grown out, and we're sitting there with high and tights, so we just kind of looked at each other. Oh well. Yeah,
I purposely left that out of the sit rep.
Yeah, greatly appreciate it. But no, when we got there, I remember thinking we would all join forces now and have, you know, two elements, unit elements, along with the two Ranger elements, and, you know, thinking that we were gonna get after it. Of course, I was concerned for the guys that had been, you know, lost or wounded, many of whom I knew well, and I had a mixture of emotions that time, you know, ranging from sadness to you know, on up to anger. But everyone there was still very dedicated and you know, focused on moving forward and accomplishing their mission.
Oh, I know it. Thanks. I mean, that still crushes my soul to this day. But did you guys remember the atmosphere when you arrived? I mean, that like me, I could just feel the tension, and then added to that is, you know, that we had a lot to learn, and we had no real U.S. presence. I mean, you guys have hit on this for before. I mean, so when the embassy went away and all the intel assets went away, I mean, we had nothing there for like 2 years. So we had this big dearth of information, no intelligence, situational awareness. So we're kind of doing this on the fly. And, you know, we also needed to secure our flanks. We had to meet the other U.S. and UN forces in the city, establish liaison. That was what Mark was doing. But again, we didn't trust anybody. So our operational security kind of prevented us from being seen as a trusted partner. And a lot of times we wouldn't telegraph our mission. You know, we would tell these guys and contact them after we had launched or after we were in a fight.
Yeah.
And so, Mark, what do you remember about the atmosphere there? I mean, you were with some of these units.
Good point, because there were different areas in the city that would, I'll use the term good and bad.
Yes.
So you wanted to make sure that you didn't lose that trust and relationship that, that rapport you had built, because as you maneuver through, that could be your saving area to get out of a bad area. But, what I remember is when we deployed, there had been a lot going on in Somalia prior to us getting there that drove the scenario for us to be called upon to do what we were asked to do. And I think, our leadership were very adamant about, because they could see how asymmetric this was, how, potentially it could go wrong. From many standpoints. So, to be successful, you have to be in full control of your destiny. And what I mean by that is they were, they went to, DC and made sure, if we're gonna launch, we have to be in control of our ROE, for example, our rules of engagement. So we deployed, under the understanding that we had control of our operations and our rules of engagement, so that we could do business the way we do it and do it right, and not be impacted or influenced by any outside entities, i.e. the UN. And so everything was aligned accordingly. Our mission in the simplest form was to capture, kill Mohammed FARAH AIDEED. And then, and initially when we got on the ground, it was like after that night of the mortars, we responded to that. And we responded, just like we thought we would. And right after that response, and I think, Mike, probably a couple missions later, it felt like it didn't take a lot of time before we saw our ROE getting encroached on and being impacted by everything, whether it be false press, whether it be the UN pushing back because there was a fight between overall control, command and control, because we did not fall under the UN from a command and control standpoint. So I think all those things, and then politically, they started to lose their their position, if you will, and allowed things to start to soften, which was putting us in a bad position, because each subsequent mission there was something that had to change, how we had to do business, how we had to identify something, and each and everything put us in it put us in a harder position, and definitely an unsafer position to do what we were there to do. Because we literally, that was it. We were there to get him and get out.
And I do remember that. I remember the press not doing us any favors. But you touch on something that if this whole thing is a building block to what we're doing today, or what the lads are doing today. I just watch it on TV now. But the whole F3 EAD, the find, fix, finish piece, but also the unblinking eye, and to where if you didn't control everything within that target set, to include the rules of engagement and your intel feeds, and in order to be able to find, to fix, to finish, then and again, that's something that was developed over time. But I remember the press did not do us any favors. How about you, Mike?
On the press?
What do you remember, like the whole atmosphere, as we arrived and kind of got into what we were doing?
Well, you mentioned the Somalis collecting on us and beginning to adapt their own response, as it were. And I was always of the opinion that I didn't want to go out and operate willy-nilly. The signature flight business, where we would go out and just sort of percuss his apparatus to see what he was doing. I understand the intent behind that. But every time we went out, I felt that we were just giving away another rehearsal opportunity for them. And that kind of troubled me a little bit. But eventually, like you were talking about with the term Groundhog Day and hanging out in the hangar watching the movies, the tempo, I think, I don't have them plotted on a calendar of where the different operations were, but it began to get a little disheartening to me that we started out with the UN hit, and that one turned out to be kind of a bust. And then the other ones that followed, we never really got the big juicy package. And I felt like we were kind of on this plane of approach where we're getting more intelligence, and we're finally getting higher and higher up the tier maybe of his people, but eventually they're going to get better and something might happen.
Yeah, that's true. You could almost feel that. And you mentioned the mortar attacks. I mean, that was kind of a harbinger. And also what I found too was it takes about 10 days for you to get into this kind of rote pattern, and you start losing your edge. So my job is going around and was kicking the Rangers in the say get off that magazine, get off that chair, get behind a gun. You only got to do this for an hour. This is your duty. And I saw that throughout my career, not just with the Rangers, but over and over and over again with guys that after that 10-day. So I remember when the first mortar round hit, everybody was scrambling, like Mark was saying, for body armor, for helmets, and then after a while, guys would just pull the poncho liner over their head, and they'd stay in their cots and not go out to the container there. And just figure what's going to suck for the other guy. But now, Bart, you received kind of the same welcome shortly after you arrived. What do you remember about the atmosphere?
Well, we got there right after the big fight, so the atmosphere was somber but professional, and I just remember the strength of everybody when he got there. I was impressed. Everybody was strong. Everybody was still doing their job. They began to immediately and seamlessly integrate our element into everything that they were doing. At the time, I hadn't been in the unit that long. Like I said, only about a year and a half. So I wasn't in a leadership position. Then I was a team member, so I wasn't in many of the leadership meetings. But all of my peers, guys like Mike and all that were my peers, they were good about answering any questions that we gave and giving us any advice from some of their more recent lessons learned. We were receiving daily intel briefings, and we're on standby to do a recovery mission for Michael Durant. My memory is that the emphasis at that time had already switched from the capture of AIDEED to the recovery of Durant.
I do remember that. In fact, somewhere around here, I've got that Time magazine. Remember, it had a picture of Mike Durant on the cover. And, we had already seen the pictures of the bodies of our comrades being drugged naked through the streets. I mean, I think they had thrown some body pieces over the wall. I mean, it was ugly. So everybody was pissed. And I can't remember when we got the proof of life for Mike Durant, but we that whole time we just assumed that he was going to meet a similar fate. Now, what did a typical day look like? I mean, for me, my place of duty was in the jock. So, we keep saying Groundhog Day. I pulled radio watch from like 02 in the morning to 10 a.m. I kept the journal. I spot checked the perimeter and the guard force. I got to know a lot of the Rangers who were killed on 3 and 4 October. I mean, that sucked. Because I could still see most of their faces. We talked about home and families, the typical stuff. In fact, there's 3 of them who lay side by side in Arlington. Whenever I'm in DC, I make it a point to go see him. I'd sleep like most guys. You sleep when you could. You sleep a few hours here and there. And then I spent the remainder of the day in the jock. So if there was a mission, I'd post on my board and then do my thing. Now, Mike, where were you located, and what did a typical day look like for you?
Well, we didn't have a real rigorous schedule. We had certain events that we might get pulled to. You want to go to the range, I think we try to get out there once a day, if not every other couple days. Just keep things tuned up. If there was nothing on the calendar, say, we were left to our own, which was nice. Guys go down to the beach, drive around the airfield there, and guys would take the Humvees out to one of the coves over there. Where they had been doing some bathing, but they had some shark attack issues, and they stopped that.
Yeah, so do you remember that shark attack?
Yeah.
Say again?
You remember that shark attack?
I remember hearing about it, yeah. And then once I ended up in Walter Reed, actually, and got evacuated, I talked with the photographer that ended up dealing with that kid at the hospital. That's just not the way to check out on a deployment.
No. It was a sad. Yeah.
But
They picked him up from the beach on the hood of a Humvee, and he had 2 bites, one complete bite out of the calf and the back of the opposite leg thigh. It was a tiger shark. I mean, it was insane. He bled out. It was such a sad thing.
Yeah, no, he was out of 10th Mountain, if I remember, or one of the MASH units. He wasn't one of ours, but
First, actually.
was that 101? Yep. Oh, sad.
Yeah.
Well, Marcus,
Yeah.
good. How about you?
I mean, it was like everybody, you had these moments of absolute chaos, but I think on a daily, kind of a daily thing, I slept in the hangar. You're always checking your kit, going through your stuff. Like Mike said, you either, you go to the range, you go through all your gear, make sure everything's ready because, everything was intel driven. And so when you got good actionable intelligence, everything was set up, throw your stuff on, create a plan, brief the plan, execute. Spent time in the jock. So yeah, I remember all those neat, pictures and posters and maps and all that cool stuff that was hanging up, which was very cool. And just, for me, just staying on call. And so I had, I'd either pull watch or whatever, but, always be on call to do the liaison thing. And then if an operation resulted into us picking up an HVT or a detainee, once we post the operation, post our piece of it, and then we were done with what we needed to do, and then there was going to be handover or transfer. We were transferring all these people to the UN, and so I was actually working with the unit JAG to affect those legal transfers to make sure that everything was done the way it was supposed to be done. So for me, I had a small security element sometimes, and we would just, we would move these folks and conduct that handover. And so that was kind of the normal grind. And, and then kind of to Mike's point, now that I think about it, I mean, there were, during this whole thing, and Mike, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think there was about 7 operations, main operations that occurred during this time, to include the last one. And it was kind of, there was a period of time just prior to this, this big battle on the 3rd and 4th, where we had a big lull, a very big lull in activity, whether it be, from the intelligence standpoint. And then later we learned, they were kitting up and distributing weapons, and, they were prepping for the big fight. And, but yeah, back to your question, that was kind of, me on a daily basis, just trying to not get too tired, but be ready on a moment's notice kind of thing. Cause you start to get sleep deprivation and all that other stuff cause you're on a weird cycle. But, yeah, that was it.
True. Hey, I got to laugh because with the whole security element, the JAG, and little would you know that probably 2 years later, you're going to be doing that same job in Bosnia and Kosovo. That you know what I mean? It's just weird how everything just builds on the other. How about you, Bartholomew? What did a typical day look like for you?
Well, we were in an old parking garage right next to where you guys were inside the same perimeter along the airfield there. We'd get up, go to our briefs, do planning while continuing to train and do rehearsals and make sure that our kit was all, refined for how we would respond to certain situations. We had tweaked some of our platforms that we had gone through to take into account that we now had, 2 elements on the ground. We were also going out and doing reconnaissance and stuff, getting to know the area, doing some of the signature flights that Mike had mentioned earlier. And in fact, one of the things I remember, you guys were actually, the 3 of you were actually all gone, I think, because of being medevaced out. But you guys I remember thinking, you guys had done a number. And when we did the signature flights and we're flying around the city and seeing everything, it was pretty much empty, man. There was no one running around. But we would do rehearsals in different areas away from the compound. And eventually, to the best of my memory, we went from preparing, like I said earlier, preparing to do any kind of capture operations to you're really focused on the rescue operations. And the timeline now is a little bit vague to me since it's been 27 years. But we also came to understand, you know, at some point in time after we'd been there a few days, that the negotiations were going on, and we probably weren't going to be permitted to go in and pull them out ourselves. That they were going to come to a negotiation for the recovery of Mr. Duran.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, I remember that. I can't remember what the old saying is, but, you know, combat is like hours and hours and days of boredom kind of interspersed with, you know, minutes of stark raving terror. So I think the next topic we have is a break in the boredom. And, you know, most of the guys, when they're not napping, I mean, they'd go ahead and maintain their equipment. They'd conduct BT. They'd rinse out their Ranger panties and hang up a fresh set for the next day. They'd eat chow. I mean, I do remember we had a decent hot chow hall, and we had a mix of MREs, you know, the prepackaged meals, and hot chow because we'd brought cooks with us. And some of the guys had traded with the local UN guys troops for German or Italian rations. I remember it was a treat to get one of those. And on rare occasions, I think you could catch a movie. And again, you know, with the Groundhog Day had just come out, you know, with Bill Murray. And that was one of the few VCR tapes that we had in the little makeshift theater, you know, back in the corner of the hangar. And that pretty much summed up the routine. Now, I do remember some other things like the volleyball game. I mean, if anybody remembers that, where the NCOs, I think, spanked the officers handedly. And if anybody remembers that story. And then if you guys could just remember something else that you guys would do to break the boredom. And Mark, I think you had sent a list earlier, so let's start with you. Yeah,
it was funny because I was thinking back on some of these things. I did not participate in the volleyball game, but I did watch part of it, and it was amazing. You know, we have, you know, the people that we have in this community and that were, you know, part of this this task force were amazing. And our log guys handling all the logistics, I don't know how they did it, but they got linked up with some of the UN guys and did these pallet exchanges of you know, like our version of an MRE, but it would be the Italian or the German. And I believe there was another countries in there. I don't recall who it was, maybe the Brits. And
yes.
What's funny is they were quick to want to exchange, but they were like, we'll just give you ours. We don't necessarily want yours. So they weren't real keen on our MREs. And but it was really, I mean, when you open these things up, what they had, it was, you know, it was like eating a 5-star restaurant. It was like amazing. You know, that's what you felt like. And I remember the big joke, you know, we talked about the porta-johns, and it's become a focal point. But, you know, in the center, you know, we had these porta-johns, and, you know, everybody's like, man, make sure you tell somebody before you go use it, because if the mortar rounds come in, you could be hurt, dead in that thing, and nobody would even know it. And you're like, you're dreading on being that guy that's caught with your pants down there, and that happens. But there was another thing that made me really appreciate, you know, it was Spartan conditions and all that stuff, but really appreciate our military. You know, and it's just like, you know, when anytime you travel abroad, how you appreciate this country. But, you know, again, we had a lot of intermixing of other people within our area, and some of those were Russian pilots because the UN had them fly the UN aircraft. And one of the helos that they had, I don't remember the nomenclature on it, but it's the largest at that time helo in the world, and it's a Russian bird. I mean, literally, that thing is so big that the rotor blades touch the ground when it's just sitting there. They just sag all the way to the ground. It's insane. And those guys didn't have much of anything, and they would come over to our water buffalo, the thing that held our water when you know, fill up your canteens and stuff, and ask for laundry detergent. Just something as simple as that. And you'd sit there and try, you know, through broken English, you know, communicate with them. But it just, I don't know, for me, it gave me appreciation. You know, this might be Spartan, but man, these guys, you know, they're here on a coattail. They don't have a whole lot of anything going on.
Oh, true.
The thing I remember is running the airfield. You know,
yes.
There were parts of it where you knew you were going to get shot at, so you had to run faster. And then parts of it where they had the cutouts that you mentioned, where they were like, you know, they were selling wood carvings and stuff. And so at some point, I think everybody tried to find their way to grab some sort of, wood carving as a souvenir from Somalia. And I know I'd gotten a rhino and a like a walking stick from there. So yeah, that was those were some of the things that I remember that kind of broke up the boredom.
Beautiful. Hey, thanks, Marcus. How about you, Mike? What did you do to break up the boredom?
Well, my thing was just to retire somewhere quiet and read. I went through a fair number of books when the TV was getting too boring because of repetitive showings of whatever film guys wanted to watch.
All day.
Yeah, I mean, I'm more the introverted guy who was just kind of off by himself. I try and socialize once or twice a day. We have our regular intel briefs, and I go around and talk to guys, but mostly I was cranking through some books.
Did you remember the volleyball game?
Yeah, so I was not a participant in the volleyball game. Most of what I know about the volleyball game came from, guys talking about it later or reading about it in the book. But I guess they really trashed Harrell.
Yeah, well, what happened was one of the sergeant majors went around and he had little like Ranger strike forces. And so they challenged the officers, right? And so, so when the officers went to field their team, these little Ranger strike forces were activated, and they would go grab that officer, and they'd tie him up with 100-mile-an-hour tape or flex cuffs, and then they put him on a stretcher. And then they go put him in his position that he was going to play. So they made big fanfare out of it. The Rangers marched in with all the officers, hog-tied on stretchers. They put him into the places they were going to play. And then the NCOs came out, big fanfare, and they'd 0 serving 0, 1 serving 0, and they just keep serving the balls over. And they would hit a guy in the chest or in the head. And but Harrell, as big as that dude is, it took a bunch of kids to get him down. And I think to this day he gave up so he wouldn't hurt anybody. But that was the volleyball.
That was probably a prudent move on his part. That was one guy I would not want to tangle with at all.
Well, yeah, I'm with you. How about you, Bart?
We'd just do, pass time. We'd, if we weren't, prepping kid or whatever, we would do PT, read some of the same things. I do remember wanting to go over. I said, there's because I'm from Florida, and there was a beach there. I do remember going down and looking at the beach and telling somebody, man, I want to go swimming. That looks inviting. And there were some waves. I thought I might buddy surf, and then they reminded me. Yeah, no, man, a couple guys got eaten by sharks down there. I'm like, wait, what? What are you talking about? So I didn't do that. And I do remember, the running around the airfield and some other things.
Yeah, because I guess there was a cannery back in the day, and they used to put all the fish heads and stuff, into the water there, and the sharks just naturally over time saw it as a feeding ground. Yeah, so that was like not a good option. Hey, now we're going to get into something to make all you boys cry. So get some tissue if you need it. But what do you remember the most about 3 October?